In the first part of this video series, I discussed 3 obstacles to class participation and how to overcome those 3 obstacles. In this part, I will discuss 2 more obstacles and how to overcome them. Now, a 4th barrier to class participation occurs when students are paralyzed by the fear of making a mistake. Look, as you know, everybody makes mistakes, especially when learning something new. And I certainly understand that. It's okay to make a mistake. In fact, it's not only okay, it's totally expected. And in a case discussion course like this, making mistakes is virtually required if you're actually going to learn something. By its very nature, the case discussion method is an inherently trial and error method of learning. And trial and error necessarily involves some error. So if you're not making mistakes, then you're not learning. In fact, making a mistake can actually be a very positive form of class participation for 2 reasons. First, your mistake provides a valuable learning experience for the entire class. If you're making a mistake in your thinking, then chances are good that at least half of the rest of the class is making that same mistake in their thinking. But the only way that we can correct the mistake is to discuss it. If we don't get the mistake out in the open where we can identify the flaw in everybody's thinking, then nobody recognizes the problem and nobody can learn anything from it. For example, when we're discussing a case study about a company, let's say that you confuse structural entry barriers with strategic entry barriers. And that mistake leads you to make a bad recommendation that would wind up killing the company. Okay? If we had that bad recommendation out in the open and could see how it would kill the company, then we can start to figure out where that bad recommendation come from. We can ask questions like, what led you to make this recommendation? Was it due to some invalid assumption or some incorrect information or some faulty logic? We can trace your thinking back to the source of the problem and say, oh, I see. The problem actually started all the way back here at the start, where you confused structural entry barriers with strategic entry barriers. Then the class has an aha moment where everybody learns something valuable from the mistake. Indeed, probably half of the class will realize that they were also making the same mistake, but they just hadn't noticed it. And that's where the real learning happens in a case discussion course. Now, by the way, in the syllabus, I have a section about class participation that explains my criteria for evaluating your participation in class. It shows 2 parallel lists in that part of the syllabus. There's a list of contributions to the class discussion that I would evaluate positively, and a list of contributions to the class discussion that I would evaluate negatively. Now, if you read those 2 lists in the syllabus carefully, then you'll notice that neither one of them contains anything about whether your contributions to the discussion are right or wrong. That's because, as far as the grading is concerned, it really doesn't matter to me whether what you say is right or wrong. So, making a mistake will not affect your class participation grade at all. That's just not one of my criteria for evaluating class participation. And this point brings me to the second reason why making a mistake is a valuable form of class participation. Making mistakes here in our class discussion will ultimately help you in your career. Look, everyone is going to make mistakes at some point in their lives, but it's far better to make those mistakes in the classroom than on the job. That's because here in the classroom, there's very little at stake. As I just mentioned a moment ago, making a mistake doesn't affect your class participation grade, so really the only thing that's at stake in the classroom is just some pride. But on a real job, in a real company, the stakes are much, much higher. There may be millions or even billions of dollars at stake, and hundreds or even thousands of jobs on the line. So if we can get our mistakes out of the way in the classroom and learn from them here so that we don't repeat them out there on the job, then you'll have much better results when it really counts, and your career will benefit. By the way, this is especially true in a strategy course like this one. In strategy, there's no such thing as a small mistake. Any decision that is important enough to be called a strategic decision has the potential to kill the company if the wrong choice is made. So you especially want to make your strategic mistakes here in the classroom rather than out there on the job. In fact, I have a very modest goal for this course. I figure if I can help you to avoid just one strategic mistake over the course of your entire career, then that will pay for the entire cost of your degree. Just one. That's enough to pay for the whole thing. I think of the case discussion method as being like a flight simulator, but for learning to run a company instead of learning to fly an airplane. When pilots get trained to fly, they must spend time in a flight simulator before they ever get into the cockpit of an actual airplane. Why is that? Because we know in advance that they are definitely going to make some mistakes in the process of learning. And if those pilots make those mistakes while flying a real airplane, then equipment and property can get damaged and people can get hurt or even killed. But if they make those beginner's mistakes in a flight simulator, then nothing gets damaged and nobody gets hurt. And they will have learned the lessons from their mistakes before they can ever do real damage in a real airplane. It's the same idea with case discussions. It gives you a chance to get your mistakes out of the way in the classroom so that you will have learned the lessons from those mistakes before you ever run a real company. So, making mistakes in the class discussion is a win-win for everyone involved. It's a win for you because you get class participation credit now, and it also helps you later to avoid mistakes in your career. It's a win for your classmates because they learn from understanding where you went wrong. And it's a win for me because it keeps the class discussion lively. So for all of these reasons, I want to encourage you, to the greatest extent possible, to just let go of the fear of making a mistake in class. In fact, I would even encourage you to try to intentionally make some mistakes in our class discussion just for the purpose of learning. Now, the fifth and final barrier to class participation is that students may be defining class participation too narrowly. Sometimes students will get stuck thinking that class participation is only about answering questions that the instructor asks, when in fact there are many other forms of class participation. To illustrate this point, I will highlight two other ways that you can participate in class: by asking questions and by making process comments. Asking perceptive questions in class is a great form of class participation for three reasons. First, getting your questions answered will help you to sharpen your understanding of the topics that you're learning about. Second, it also helps your classmates too, because if you have a question in your mind, then there's a good chance that half of the rest of the class is also thinking about the same question, but they're just too afraid to ask it. So if we can just get the question out in the open, then everybody can learn and benefit from the answer. This helps me too, because it gives me a clearer picture about what the class does or does not understand. Getting questions asked and answered in class also helps me because then I won't have to answer the same question over and over in conversations with individual students. So asking questions is another win-win because it benefits you, your classmates, and me. The third reason why asking questions is a great form of class participation is that it can be a lot more comfortable for you than trying to answer one of my questions. Look, if you're trying to answer one of my questions, then you're on the spot. The whole class is looking at you, and they may be ready to pounce if they think you're getting it wrong. And being on the spot like that can be a bit uncomfortable. However, if you're the one who's asking the question, then you're putting someone else on the spot. I would be on the spot if the question's directed toward me, or maybe you're putting one of your classmates on the spot by asking them to explain their comments or to defend their ideas. Either way, you're not on the spot, so there's no pressure on you. Another helpful form of class participation is to make process comments about the class discussion itself. These could be simple comments on the reasoning and ideas being expressed by your classmates, such as stating your reasons for agreeing or disagreeing with them. Or process comments could be deeper observations about the overall direction of the discussion, such as highlighting important issues that the class seems to have been ignoring. So let's recap the ideas that we covered here. There are simple solutions for overcoming the 5 barriers to class participation. Those solutions are: 1. Come to class prepared. 2. Beat the time delay effect by preparing your comments and answers in advance. 3. Be willing to make mistakes. 4. Ask questions. And 5. Give process comments. Now that you understand the 5 barriers to class participation and the solutions for each of them, you have the power and the tools to succeed in class participation in any course. You can take charge of these class participation challenges and overcome them.